I'm really very grateful to be here, and it's wonderful. And I didn't know it was the last lecture of the project, so I'm even more honored to give this paper. It's my first time in Ottawa, and it's actually really wonderful to be here. It's not my first time in Canada, but almost my first time in Canada. And it's interesting to see that the political circumstances, if we should call them just political circumstances, are being visible in the city through rallies I was allowed to join, although I am not a Canadian. And so I'm really, really happy to be here. So I'll be talking about autonomy, but it's from a philosopher's point of view. So it's mostly fundamental issues, and I actually do hope that you law people will get anything out of it. Please ask questions if you have any, preferably after the lecture, but if there's anything you really, really don't get, just ask, okay? So this is what I'm going to do. I'm first going to say something about the meaning of the concept of autonomy and the relevance, and then I'm starting on questions about why it's so hard to be autonomous. Because what I'm interested in the book and in this paper, in this lecture, is what are the tensions we come across when we try to be autonomous. We're ambivalent, that's one point. We might be alienated from our choices, that's another point. And we also come across tensions from without, that's probably bad English, but never mind, in the social contexts we are trying to be autonomous in. So I'll talk also about the social conditions of individual autonomy. And there are more tensions on the side of within the subject when the subject tries to be autonomous. One tension, as I said, is ambivalence, another is alienation, another is self-deceit. We tend to self-deceive ourselves, and that influences our autonomy, as is probably easy to grasp. But I'm not going to talk about that today. You can ask questions if you want to in the Q&A. So what is it? The value of autonomy is a fact of life, says philosopher, legal philosopher, so I suppose everybody knows him, has heard of him. Can I have some mm-hms or mm-hms? No? No? Okay, anyway, okay, he is died a couple of years ago. He has written from a legal point of view and also from a ethical point of view about autonomy. And he says it's a fact of life, and what he means is it's a fact of life in liberal democracies. And what does it mean to be autonomous? It just means something rather basic, I argue. We can usually reflect on what we want together with others, and we usually know what we want and can give our own reasons for it. So why are you here? Well, either because Val told you to be here, or because you thought autonomy is an interesting thing, and you could give your own reasons, yeah? And you have sort of reflected about whether you want to go to this lecture or not. So that is, you are here for autonomous reasons and maybe a little bit also for grading reasons. I haven't got a clue. Okay, so that's what I mean by autonomy. And autonomy is a prerequisite for taking responsibility for decisions, responsibility towards yourself and to others. So you are the one who has to justify why you're here when this is an autonomous choice. And you also have to be able to tell yourself afterwards, why did I do this? Yeah, I mean, and then there can be good and bad reasons, but that's the idea. You have to be to take the responsibility for yourself, but also when you talk to others. And making your own choices in that very fundamental sense is constitutive of liberal democratic societies, because you also have to make a choice when you vote. So voting is just like going to this lecture. You have to inform yourself before, you have to think about it, and then you have to make a choice, whether you come here or not, or which party you want to vote for. Okay, this is the story about autonomy. However, the philosopher Iris Murdoch wrote novels and also lots of philosophy. And I got a quote from her. "It's not like that. One doesn't just look and choose and see where one might go. One's sunk in one's life up the neck, or I am. You can't swim about in a swamp or a quicksand. It's when things happen to me that I know what I evidently wanted, not before. I can see when there's no way back. It's a muddle. I don't even understand it myself." So that is something we also understand immediately, I suppose. When you think about relationships, think about your relationship to your mother, just, to name one, which is probably a little muddled, or maybe not. And you very often have the feeling you are not deciding clearly for yourself, but things happen to you. And that is one of the tensions I'm so interested in. What does it mean? Does it mean we are not autonomous at all? Or does it mean we are autonomous in a different, maybe sort of more precarious way? So some of the reasons for tensions. We are always already under obligations and in relationships with others, so we can't just do what we want to do. Yeah, we always already are someone with a certain biography, an identity, with plans and a past, and with relations to our parents and to the whole family and so on, and to friends, of course. We don't always know exactly what we want and how much or not so much we want it. Do you really want to study law? Or was it just, because your parents told you it would be a good thing to do? And is that idea that your parents thought it was a good thing to do, will that really push you through the whole study? Yeah? Or does it have to be your decision? And we don't know ourselves, we don't always know ourselves. It's specifically in relationships. Do we actually really do we really know what we want? Or are we self-deceiving in, loving someone or hating someone or not liking very much someone? And, all this relationships interpretation is very prone to be self-deceptive. And also, what this just means is we always make choices within social context, and it's difficult to break away from them. It's not impossible. You can go out now and start a fresh life and forget everybody who's, who you have. Yeah, don't smile, you can do that. I mean, it's possible, yeah. We usually don't do it because we think about the situation and then weigh reasons and then go for the best reasons, and they are mostly to stick with your life. That's what they tell you. So I want to sort of talk about these different reasons for the tensions. And the first reason for tensions is ambivalence. And most autonomy theorists argue that autonomy requires where we know exactly what we want. Harry Frankfurt, he's a philosopher very famous in autonomy theory. He says, if you can't stand wholeheartedly behind your choices, then you're not autonomous, you're irrational. So if you say, God, I really doubt whether I should go on with law, then you're irrational and you're not autonomous. But I think we often have very good reasons for one option and at the same time for another option. So it's not so clear, even if we reflect really rationally, as Frankfurt wants us to do, even if we do that, it can be sort of really very difficult, and it can be even dramatic or even tragic. So there are easy choices between film and theatre. Yeah, are you going to the film tonight or to the musical or wherever? But there are difficult choices, life choices we call them. Which study should you do? You've decided for law. You could have decided philosophy as well. So, yeah, these are difficult choices. And there are lots of examples in the literature. The farmer and the lawyer, should there's one person sort of constantly reflecting whether he should be a farmer or a lawyer, and then he will be a lawyer, and at the end of his life he thinks back and thinks, oh Jesus Christ, this was really the wrong decision. He should have been a farmer. And The Mother and the Judge is an example from how do we weigh reasons when we're in a situation where my daughter has something, I don't know, at a theater performance. If she's small, my daughter doesn't do any theater performances any longer, but you know, if you're a young mother, and she's a judge, the mother, and she has duties there, so what should she do? Difficult choices. So what is usually the basis for our decisions? And I need to introduce this, if my computer lets me. Yeah. So Richard Ford, in the great opening scene of his novel The Lay of the Land, I can really advise you to read it, or a lawyer or philosophy or whatever, describes how the story's protagonist, Frank Bascom, reads a morning newspaper report about the failed student Don Houston Clevenger, who, during a written exam for a class of prospective nurses, bursts into the room, points his gun at the teacher present, and asks, "Are you ready to meet your creator?" To which she just blinked, I'm quoting, just blinked her deep green eyes curiously twice and said, "Yes, yes, I believe so, yes." Clevenger then shoots her first, and then himself. Bascom himself is plunged into deep reflection by this sad, dismal riddle. He's reading the report in the newspaper, remember. He would have answered Clevenger's question, "Are you ready to meet your creator?" differently. And now comes the quote. "You know, not really. I guess not quite yet." He would have immediately started thinking about all the things that he really might have liked to do. Faced with Mr. Clevenger's question, "Are you ready to meet your creator?" and a little pushed for time, I'm sure I would have begun soundlessly inventorying all the things I hadn't done yet. Fucked a movie star, adopted Vietnamese orphan twins and sent them to Williams, hiked the Appalachian Trail, brought help to the benighted drought-ravaged African nation, learned German, and he goes on and on and on, voted Republican. So this is what this protagonist in the novel starts thinking about when asked, "Are you ready to meet your maker? Are you ready with your life?" Yeah, and I think probably most of us would have different wishes and desires. Yeah, I don't have the wish to vote Republican, for instance. I'm not very puzzled by that, but we all have these lots of different ideas and wishes and desires in our head. So, what's the lesson? In the autonomy literature, there's usually assumed a unified account of the self. Yeah, it's all one unity, like the teacher in the class. Yeah, it's one unity, and I can step back and think, yes, that's perfect. I'm going to meet my creator. This is what I think I want to. There are no contradictions, inconsistencies, no identity breaks, and no alienation. But I think empirically, phenomenologically, the opposite is right. The self is very complex. And especially feminist theory of autonomy has pointed out that clear decisions are often not that simple, because there are real conflicts. Obligations, as I said, toward your child versus at work, for instance, or towards your friend versus at work, yeah. And there's real complexity. And why the unified account of the self is also wrong is because it's not irrational to doubt here, to doubt the reasons. It's very rational, because both sets of reasons are very rational, very, very sort of helpful, very understandable, plausible reasons. So that's why the complexity of the self of Frank Bascom is much more plausible than a unified account. So this was the first reason. Now comes for the tensions within the autonomous self, yeah? We're still at the, remember I started with some meaning of autonomy, and This is how we act autonomously. And then I started thinking about, but it's not always like that. And the first tension was the tension about ambivalence. We are ambivalent. How can we be autonomous when we're ambivalent? And now comes the second tension, and the tension is about, do I really want what I'm doing? Can I really identify wholly with what I'm doing? That's what's called alienation. So we have always different projects and relationships. I talked about that already. The classic idea of autonomy is we are autonomous only if we can fully stand behind our projects and relationships. So I'm autonomous only if I know this is the right relationship for me, this is the right job for me, this is the right lecture for me to give today. That is what autonomy is about. But again, if we look at how we usually behave and how we act, so that's what phenomenological accounts do. They are not the same as empirical accounts, so asking people what they think, but they observe and interpret reality. So they argue that there's always division, or I looked that up, diremption, because I wanted something English for conflict on Azadeh, Entzweiung. Entzweiung in English? No. Anybody German? No. Anyway, I mean, alienation is something, a division where should be unity. So you're alienated from something, but in fact there should be a unity between the something and you, some sort of harmony. So you're alienated from, for instance, the reactionary attitudes of one of your friends. You think, is this really my friend? This is a little alienating what you've said tonight. Are you really supporting Trump? I don't believe that. That's alienating. Doesn't mean he's not a friend any longer, but there's some alienation. And so what we usually desire or wish or try to get at with our autonomous life is feeling at home in our lives. And not feeling at home in our lives is something alienating. So I was thinking about this metaphor. I'm sure you've all been dozens of times to the art gallery, the National Art Gallery, and there's this spin, the Louise Bourgeois spin. Everybody something in their heads? If not, look it up now. We are usually, when we are in relationships, like a spin in a web. I think that's a good metaphor for our lives in general. And the web is made of very many little strings, and these are our relationships. And sometimes these strings break, for instance, with a reactionary friend, Maybe they don't break, but they get sort of bruised. And lots of others, like my parents are dead, so I can say whatever I want. My relationship with my mother was a little bruised, And maybe you can think of good relationships and bad relationships as the spin in this web, and changing relationships, of course. If everything is in harmony, then you think this is a life I'm at home with. But this is probably for everybody never the case. You think that you're only acting authentically when you can say, yes, this is the relationship I really want, and this is a harmonious and good and non-alienated or non-ambivalent relationship. So the question is, can a partially alienated or non-authentic life form a unity, and can we be autonomous with a partial alienated life? Another quote which I want to first introduce for an alienated but still not non-autonomous life. So what does it mean when a person is no longer able to perceive her own life as self-determined, as her own, and why does it make sense to use the term alienation here? It is an example of the contrast of the self-determined and the alienated life. Colm Toybin's novel Brooklyn, there's a film, maybe you've seen the film? Yeah. Okay, write it down, look it up. Toybin is Toibin. Tells the story of a young Irish girl, Elis Lacey, of Friary Strait in Enniscorthy, I suppose that's somewhere in Ireland, who, faced with the hopelessness of life in Ireland, sets off to Brooklyn, New York. There she will get a job in a department store where she will be able to earn money and perhaps eventually return home. But nothing goes well for her in Brooklyn, at least not at first. Toybin writes, "She was nobody here. It was not just that she had no friends and family. It was rather that she was a ghost in this room, in the streets, on the way to work, on the shop floor. Nothing meant anything. The rooms in the house on Friary Street belonged to her, she thought. When she moved in them, she was really there. In the town, if she walked to the shop or to the vocational school, the air, the light, the ground, it was all solid and part of her, even if she met no one familiar. Nothing here was part of her. It was false, empty, she thought." So, can we say that she's totally not autonomous in the life in Brooklyn because she decided to go to Brooklyn, to leave her home? It turns out not to be what she wanted, and she feels alienated. And I think this being at home or not at home in a room, for instance, or on the ground, it was all solid and part of her. Yeah, we know this feeling when we move somewhere where we think, yes, this is where we want to be. This is part of me. This feels like home. Yeah, even if it's not your home city, it can be the case somewhere else. So I think she's still autonomous, but it shows that you can be sort of autonomous and still very homesick and very sort of alienated from the life you're actually living here. There's a balance, of course. At one point, she would have to go back to Ireland or make friends in Brooklyn. You can't go on like this, not if you're an autonomous being and if you have the choice to go back. Yeah, that, of course, is part of the story. You can't stay there and be the same completely alienated person in Brooklyn. So she either has to make friends, what she does make friends in Brooklyn more than is healthy, but anyway, read the book. And it's just an example to think about what does it mean to be autonomous and feel at home in the life you lead yourselves. Yeah, do you lead a life which feels at home, or do you lead a life which is alienated for the most part? So the next example is again a book, just a brief quote. I think I'm good. It's a novel by Naipaul, and it's a novel written in '61. He got the Nobel Prize in, I can't remember when, I think sometime in the 2000s. And it's about Mohun Biswas. The novel is called Mr. Biswas. A Hindu-Indo-Trinidadian who continually strives for success and mostly fails, who marries into the influential Tulsi family only to find himself dominated by it completely. And he sets a goal for his life, his own house. And it's very clear that his own house is again a metaphor for being autonomous or authentic or having his own identity, as you will realize when you read this. He thought of the house as his own, though for years it had been irretrievably mortgaged. And during these months of illness and despair, he was struck again and again by the wonder of being in his own house, the audacity of it, to walk in through his own front gate, to bar entry to whoever he wished. As a boy, he had moved from one house of strangers to another, and since his marriage, he felt he had lived nowhere but in the house of the Tulsis. I mentioned them, his in-laws. And now, at the end, he found himself in his own house, on his own half lot of land, his own portion of the earth. That he should have been responsible for this seemed to him, in these last months, stupendous. Okay. I think it's clear why I use these quotes as a metaphor for a non-alienated, autonomous life. But you can also see that being partly alienated, so not just yet living in the right house or in the right room, can also be autonomous. And if you think about your own life, I'm sure there are parts which are sort of alienated. Some relationships might not be sort of fully accepted or fully endorsed. And maybe you have a sometimes ambivalent and sometimes even alienated attitude towards your own studies. But I think these are tensions, understandable and totally plausible tensions within an autonomous person, and not a critique of being autonomous, as though we could only be autonomous if, we have our own house, our own half lot of land, our own portion of the earth. Maybe we don't need that completely and can still be autonomous. Because we're usually, not always, but usually alienated from certain aspects of our lives. And even if we have the identification with our intentions and plans as the complete identification as the aim of our lives, it doesn't have to be, this identification doesn't have to be complete in order to still feel as though we can endorse it for ourselves. It's our life, it's my project to give lectures on autonomy. And even if I sometimes feel alienated from it and so on and so forth, it's still my project. And I hope it's still your project to study whatever you study. And to be able to identify with it, even though there are elements which you can't really identify with and which you feel alienated from. So people can be authentic in different roles. Like I'm authentic in the role as a lecturer, but I'm also totally authentic in my role as a mother, for instance, or as a friend, or as somebody traveling, or as somebody meeting new people. It's not that there's only one self that is authentic. We're usually authentic in very different roles in our lives, yeah? And we can be not very authentic when we meet a couple of friends we don't like very much, then you play a role. But you can play that quite authentically, actually, because, you have decided this is the role I want to play. And I can be here quite authentically, although it's just one role in my life. And I have others which are not worse or better, like, the private self. When I'm at home, then I'm the real, authentic person. I think that's not true. We can be very authentic at home in very different roles. That's, again, the spin in this web. We can have very different relationships or strings or projects and still be authentic in them and also be mostly alienated from them. I mean, not from all of them, yeah? But you see the point? Can I have some mm-hms? Yeah? Okay, thank you. So now I'm coming to the other perspective on autonomy. So autonomous, we're never alone. That is what we've seen already, I think, I hope, but which is conceptually relevant as well. It's not like, Kant, for instance, Immanuel Kant, everybody heard of him? Please? Yeah? Okay. Thank you. Everybody heard of Rawls? John Rawls? He's American, okay, but still. Yeah, good, great. So they all think about autonomy in a way that that you associate with the lonesome cowboy in the desert, yeah, on his horse, and there he is autonomously riding where he has to go. No strings attached, no, obligations, nothing. And that is conceptually confused, because how did the cowboy learn to be autonomous? Well, there has to be someone. Even John Rawls had a mother who taught him how to be autonomous, or as Rawls himself argues very convincingly, that this is what school should teach children, to be autonomous, to take a step back and think whether the religion their parents have is really the religion they want to endorse as well. Yeah. So autonomy means we are always already taking into account other persons. The vision of men as mushrooms is an ultimate picture of autonomy. Sheila Ben Habib says about Hobbes. Yeah? Okay, I don't even ask. Hobbes is quite important in political philosophy, but never mind. And Hobbes had this vision that really individuals, they grow out of earth like mushrooms. And Sheila Ben Habib is one of the first really very convincing feminist critiques talking about autonomy as being a relational concept. So others are not an obstacle to autonomy, but an enabling condition. We learn to be autonomous on the basis of relations with others. So that's why the question, where do we learn what autonomy means, is so relevant. And therefore the role of intimate relationships or friendships is so constitutive for autonomy. We talk about what we want to do with others. Everybody, I think everybody of you sitting here usually talks about at least difficult decisions with others. You don't just think about it yourself. And if you do, it might be sometimes necessary to do that, but it always feels a little, was going to say alienated, but that's not the point. It feels a little bit too little if you only think about these things yourself, if you haven't got somebody to talk about these things. And of course we have learned to be autonomous. All of you who are sitting here, we are all privileged to have been to schools and to have parents who told us to be autonomous, yeah? And that's, of course, an unbelievable privilege and advantage to be able to think about your life this way and to actually make informed decisions like that. But we have to realize that it's only because we have been in webs of relationships which were very enabling and not sort of pushing us in the wrong direction and saying things like, no, this is not your right, no, you have to do this or that. Yeah? Okay. So social circumstances have a Janus face. Janus face is this face which has two faces, yeah, this head. Everybody knows it nowadays from Harry Potter. Do you? First volume? Yeah, okay. So an example is that we still live in a patriarchal society. We all know that, I hope. So we do have formal equality of rights, mostly, not even that. Of course, I'm not talking about all the countries in the world, I'm only talking about liberal democracies at this moment, yeah? So we do have formal equality of rights, but there's a lot of substantial informal gender stereotyping. I'm sure if you've all thought about that and you've all met it, and it's not only gender stereotyping, it's also racial stereotyping, as you all and we all know. And this is an important aspect in our whole life, but especially visible in the so-called adapted preferences. Do you know what adapted preferences are? I really need some mm-hms. No? Okay. So the example, it's really easy. The example is the fox and the grapes. The fox tries to get at the grapes, but because he finds them really, really fantastically tasteful, but he can't get there because they're too high up. So after a while, he thinks, I don't really like grapes. I don't want to have grapes. I mean, he's trying to be rational. He can't get there anyway. So he convinces himself that he doesn't really like the grapes. So that's what we call an adapted preference. He adapts his preference. He doesn't want the grapes. That's a very usual concept to describe how women, how black, how whatever people adapt their preferences in unfair, unjust, patriarchal, racist societies. So it used to be, when I was a young feminist and not an old feminist, the usual example was that girls wanted to be nurses and boys wanted to be doctors. But that has changed, happily, because lots of women are now becoming doctors, at least in the countries I know, but I'm sure it's in Canada the same. The interesting thing is the really good jobs in higher, the better paid jobs, like being a surgeon in the hospital, are still men have the majority, the clear majority. But I think patriarchal ideology is not comprehensive, neither is racist ideology, because criticism remains possible. What I do now is step out of the patriarchal society, I mean being aware of having it everywhere here, and criticize it. And if you are, okay, I'm not going to argue against other positions, but there are positions which say we can't really get out of it, so it's almost impossible to criticize it. I don't think that's right. I think it's right to have a critical point of view and look at people and see in which way they are structurally discriminated against. You can look at people, you can look at the society, you also can look at the sort of rights we have, yeah? I don't actually know about abortion rights in Canada, but that is, of course, a very important example for structural sexism, if there are abortion rights like the US now have in very many states. Okay, so what do we do when we think as a feminist about our own situation? We try to get, when we do have to make choices, well, first of all, we realize what we have to make choices. We don't just do what everybody does, yeah? Sometimes you have to sort of step back from how you live and think, okay, this is actually a choice, yeah? Even if I didn't realize it before. So you have to think about choices, you have to get more information, and you have to be in critical dialogues. In order to individually cope with a structurally sexist or racist society. On a political level, of course, we criticize the structures. We try to use whatever media we have in order to criticize the structures, the ideology, the prejudices, the stereotyping, yeah? But both are relevant, and both the individual autonomy as the political autonomy are equally important. And now maybe you say, well, you've lost something, namely the social structures, but you can't really separate the individual and the political from the social, yeah? We usually say the political is here, the social is in the middle, and the individual is here, but of course it's all mixed up with one another. We have to change perspective if we want to focus on the individual or on the social context or on the political conditions, yeah? Okay. Is it okay if I talk about another 10 minutes or so? When do you want to start with the Q&A?
I think 10 minutes or so.
Okay, good. I think I'll be able to do that. So what I want to talk about now is, how do we know that someone is autonomous? So if people make choices we think are not autonomous, how do we know that, and how do we judge it? And not only we, but how does society judge them? Do you understand immediately what I mean? When I talk about this example of a limiting case, I hope limiting case is the right sort of word. So this is a society, we're all autonomous, but there are people where society thinks they might not really be autonomous. Okay, don't read it before I start reading. Now I start reading. The woman practiced the woman of the example, particularly restrictive form of Islam, Salafism, in which she dresses in full body veil, obeys her husband and other male members of her family in all important matters, and rarely leaves the house except to bring her children to school. France's highest, it's obviously an example, sorry I should have mentioned that, of France, in France. France's highest administrative body, the Council of State, ruled that the woman identified only as Faiza X had adopted, and that's a quote, a radical practice of her religion incompatible with the essential values of the French community, notably with the principle of equality of the sexes, and therefore she does not fulfill the conditions of assimilation listed in the country's civil code as a requirement for gaining French citizenship. Okay, this is a real example from the real world. Now think about it. Yeah? I mean, you are all lawyers, you probably know much better how to think about these examples than I do. So how should we determine whether someone is autonomous or not? How does the court know that this woman is not autonomous? They judge on the basis of the choices she has made, yeah? But there are other people in our society who are not very autonomous when it's about values or gender or whatever. So gender and other stereotypes in our liberal society might be as restricting as the one in the case of Faiza X. So borderline cases, and that's what I would like to argue, are always difficult. In a strict religious community, are only the women non-autonomous? What about the men? They have to behave in a certain way as well. And if equal rights are for all, what does it mean formally and substantially? What does it mean for this woman, Faiza X, to be autonomous in the world she is living? It's difficult. I'm not saying, yes, she's clearly autonomous, so the court was wrong, but I'm also not saying she's clearly not autonomous, so the court is right. I'm just trying to sort of make you see the problems in this sort of cases. So for democratic participation, which is of course a right for everybody, equally for everybody in a liberal democracy, individual and collective autonomy go together. And one is not fully possible without the other. So we are not living in a proper democracy if there's a group of people who doesn't participate because they haven't learned to participate. Yeah, you can see it. Democracy is only if everybody of you has sort of raised their voices. Now there's one group who hasn't done that. Is it still democracy? No. So to enable individual autonomy, we have to have the necessary options: study or not study, go to school, not to school, have children, not have children, for everybody in the same way, in equality and freedom. Okay. So I'm almost there, but I've got 5 other minutes. So I'll just summarize. We've seen thinking, reflecting, and reasons we need to be autonomous, and their boundaries from within, ambivalence, alienation, self-deceit, and other forms. And the social and political conditions must meet our autonomous life. Habermas calls it accommodating forms of life. So our social life has to be such that we all are encouraged to be autonomous. You have to learn at school to be autonomous, yeah? So this is what's necessary for everybody to be autonomous in the same way and to participate in the democracy we all live in. We also have seen that there's a need for intimate relationships and friendships, and for democratic structures of equality and freedom. And even if under non-ideal circumstances, we live now under non-ideal circumstances, clearly, because we're still living in a patriarchal society, an autonomous and therefore, I would argue, but not today, a good life is possible. But autonomy is a task. And I'm quoting again, it's my last quote. It's a novel by Ian McEwan. Jesus, I forgot the title. Oh, maybe one of you, if I read the quote, maybe one of you will. I know the book by heart, but I can't remember the title. Never mind. At some point in his life, Michael Bird, who is a very, very successful scientist who got the Nobel Prize, and not in a very sort of fair way. He stole some stuff from a postdoc. It's all in a novel, yeah? It's not real. and he got the Nobel Prize. But at a certain point, he thinks about his life. And now that he had entered upon the final active stages of his life, he was beginning to understand that, barring accidents, life did not change. He had been deluded. He had always assumed that a time would come in adulthood, a kind of plateau, when he would have learned all the tricks of managing, of simply being. All mails and emails answered, all papers in order, books alphabetically on the shelves, clothes and shoes in good repair in the wardrobes, and all his stuff where he could find it, with the past, including its letters and photographs, sorted into boxes and files, the private life settled and serene, accommodation and finances likewise. In all these years, the settlement, the calm plateau, had never appeared, and yet he had continued to assume, without reflecting on the matter, that it was just around the corner, just around the next turn, when he would exert himself and reach it, that moment when his life became clear and his mind free, when his grown-up existence could properly begin. He's in his 60s when he writes this, yeah? So why do I say that it's a task? I think Ian McEwan writes really fantastically here about what it means not to be autonomous, of having the feeling that everything is just happening to you, and of actually being autonomous in the sense that you endorse your choices, yeah? And he, Michael Beard, is waiting for this moment to come, as though it's something which comes to us from the outside, yeah? So he thinks, well, just wait, the next corner, the next turn, there will be this wonderful plateau where we all lead our adult and sort of tidied up lives. Okay, therefore I think autonomy is a task. It's a task not to self-deceive yourself. It's a task also to try to be autonomous in political life. I think that's what Ian McEwan is trying to say here. Of course, it's an interpretation, but never mind. So that's the last bit. So when we look at autonomy from the inside perspective and the tensions, and then from the outside perspective at the social and political conditions, the last point I think is relevant to see that autonomy doesn't come to us like good weather or bad weather. It's something we have to embrace and we have to be interested in and to do. Okay, so of course we cannot plan everything, and we are not always simply rational, and we always act and consult with others and take them into account. But we have to take responsibility for ourselves, as Michael Beard is not doing in this last quote, and act for good reasons. And then we can lead an autonomous and, I think, meaningful life, and perhaps even a happy life, although that depends on other aspects of our life. Okay, thank you very much for your patience. Any questions?
Is autonomy synonymous with having free will?
Okay. Yes, the second one?
And the second one is, you identify that being autonomous is possible while having tensions such as alienation. And I was wondering, if one stays in a state of tension such as alienation, is autonomy then possible?
What was the first part of the question?
The second question was...
If something is autonomy then possible, that was your last sentence, and I didn't get the first part
If
of the
one
sentence.
stays in the state of alienation,
Okay,
is autonomy
good.
possible?
Yeah, thank you.
So these are the two questions. So these are the two questions.
Yes, okay, thank you very much. Well, about the free will. This is a good question, of course. My answer to it is the free will discussion is different from the autonomy discussion. And why is that so? Because the free will people want to talk about the free will mostly independently of cultural, political, whatever circumstances. So my position on the free will is it doesn't really touch the autonomy question, but since so many people think that it does touch the autonomy question, like you, what I would like to say is that have you read, anybody, Peter Strawson, Freedom and Resentment? If you ever read just one article of philosophy of the 20th century in your life, I'm now really committing myself, I think it should be Freedom and Resentment by Peter Strawson. It's really a very good article. And what is he writing about? He's writing about what does free will mean? Does it mean we can do whatever we want? Is this an option for the free will? Yeah, being able to fly? Or is the free will linked in our moral practices to something like responsibility, knowing the difference between someone who is capable of acting rightly and not capable of acting rightly, and so on and so forth. That does not mean that I have a position on, Strawson says, I need to have a position on the determinacy of our will. Yeah, is our will determined, yes or no? I don't need to say no, it isn't, or yes, it is. What I want to say is that our actions, our free actions, are constitutively linked to our social practices. And the social practices, they give you a hold on what we mean by free. Yeah, I really wanted to step on your toe, yeah, and be immoral. That was totally determined by my decision within a social world. We cannot say anything outside the social world and outside our vocabulary, which constitutes our practices. Yeah? Actually, I think Kant, which you've all heard of, is saying exactly the same. Kant doesn't want to really take a stance on the whole universe is determined versus no, we act on our free will and change the universe all the time. He says we are rational and we don't want to say anything outside the universe we are part of. And rationality means we can act on rational grounds freely. But whether or not this is saying our will is free in general, like having all these options, or our will is only free with respect to the rational options. And that is usually in philosophy called a compatibilist. A compatibilist is someone who always has the best position in the middle of determinism and totally free will. Yeah, it's compatible with both. That's the idea. But I think it's very plausible. Yeah, so I don't have to have a position on the free will in order to be able to talk about autonomy. Yeah, first question answered. Sorry, a little long. And the other one about alienation. Yes, you're right. How do we know that someone acts autonomously? Let's just say this person knows what it means to be autonomous, knows that there are choices, and knows that she could leave this relationship which she feels really alienated from, but still it's very difficult for her because of obligations, because of sort of moral obligations towards other people and so on. Then I think she is in principle autonomous. And whether she is really autonomous is a question only she herself can answer. I would say, I know that, other people, sort of frowns at me, yeah, sorry, but if she, if she's really able, like cognitively, psychologically, emotionally, socially, able to think about her choices, and she keeps being in this alienated, you only said alienated, you didn't say something like violent or whatever. I think with violent relationships it's different. It's totally irrational to stay in it, understandable but irrational. But not with alienation, it's just not as harmful to yourself as physical violation. It can be, yes, okay, yeah. I just don't want to look at it well because there can be sort of, it can be very different to balance the two, or to make a difference between them. Did I answer your question?
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think there's time for one more question, maybe. But I'm happy if you're all happy and convinced. And okay. Yeah. Well.
Please join me in thanking Professor Roessler for a really fabulous conversation.
Thank you very much. Can I say one thing? Or I hope this is not weird, or it's not politically totally incorrect. But Canada for me means something like this lecture room. I've never ever spoken before a public so diverse. My students are far from this diverse. And you know, University of Amsterdam, I'm retired, so I don't have any students any longer, which is also, which is ambivalent. But no, this is really great, and I think it says something about Canada. I hope it says something about Canada. And I hope you'll be able to keep it like that and not lose this wonderful independence. Okay, thank you very much.
Elbows up.